Well, I imagine we could start this conversation with Princeton or the Pig and Whistle restaurant. And I think I'd rather start with the Pig and Whistle restaurant.
Well, Pig and Whistle is probably the reason why I'm here in Baton Rouge. My father, after he was discharged from the Army at the end of the Second World War, and several of his friends came to Baton Rouge to start to practice medicine. And they formed a small group of practicing physicians that, they call the Baton Rouge Clinic. And they started the clinic over the Pig and Whistle restaurant, which was located on Plank Road. And it was, in an area where there were a large number of people who were living, and it was convenient for people to come to that location. And of course, the clinic has grown substantially since then.
And how did you end up at Princeton?
My mother's baby brother, who she absolutely adored, Alan Ford Colley, went to Princeton. He left in 1945 to join the United States Army Air Corps and flew P-51s. I take it back, he left before 1945. He was supposed to graduate in 45. And he flew P-51s from Iwo Jima over Japan in combat, and then came back, obviously, after the war, and he was attending law school at Emory when he was killed in a fighter plane accident. And my mother always wanted, me to go to Princeton. And so, I followed in my late uncle's footsteps, although I would never say that I've ever been able to follow in his footsteps. He was truly a great man.
But something brought you back home.
Well, yeah, this is where I'm from. I haven't ever spent more than that 4 years within, further than about 10 miles away from that flagpole in the middle of the parade field. Like an old dog, I just come back, get underneath the porch.
If you go to the LSU Law Center website and you pull up Cheney Joseph's Honors and Awards, I get two things: the Eagle Scout of 1956 and Lightweight Crew 1964. Tell me a little bit about those things.
Great accomplishments, probably the two finest accomplishments that I've really capped out, at that point when I finally won my varsity letter, because I was no good at all. I rode bow, but I wasn't any good at all.
So those meant the most.
It meant a lot to me. Finally the coach went ahead and said, "Okay, Joseph, you've lettered." And I worked hard to get my Eagle Scout. I went to Philmont like all Boy Scouts did back in that day when they could, to finish up all their merit badges and get the Eagle Scout. And that was really a big accomplishment. That's Ray swearing me in as district attorney. Probably the only time in the history of this parish that the United States Attorney ever swore in the state district attorney.
You don't like change too much?
No, I don't. I absolutely refuse to have them renovate my office. And Mark Drennan, when he spoke at the rededication of the law school a number of years ago, commented on the fact that there is one place in the law school that is completely unchanged, and that's Cheney's office.
But seriously, it really does seem that there's a love affair between you and teaching. What is it about teaching or communicating with young law students that means so much to you?
As I used to tell people when I was executive counsel, they said, you teaching? I said, yeah, I'm teaching my first year criminal justice course in the spring. And they said, do you enjoy that? I said, oh, absolutely, because that's the only 3 hours of the week that people have to listen to what I'm saying, because they know some of it's going to be on the exam. No, I really enjoy some of it. I really enjoy teaching. I think those of us who are out here because we like the interaction with students. We like the intellectual challenges that students, and for that matter, former students provide for us, because there's no greater pleasure than to get a phone call from a good friend who's a former student, who's maybe a defense lawyer or maybe a prosecutor, who's got some question, or maybe a judge who's got some question that deals with some sort of situation that, frankly, I've never thought about. And I normally learn a whole lot more as a result of those conversations than I can possibly communicate back to that individual.
Well, you've said you don't like the word mentoring, but you've been a confidant for a lot of your former students that are practicing now in Louisiana's
Well,
courtroom.
I don't want to use the word confidant, but I do eat lunch with them from time to time. Louis Unglesby, who I've known since I first started teaching, he and I try to get together at least once every 6 months and have lunch and, talk about things. And there are a number of other people that I try to keep up with. And the older you get, the more complicated that becomes.
When you talk about exchanging ideas about cases and all, was that something that you just loved from when you went to Princeton and from the beginning of venturing into this world of law? You liked sort of that mental gymnastics?
Well, the mental gymnastics associated with dealing with legal problems, I do think is a lot of fun, and it's also invigorating. And working on a case with a group of other lawyers who are really good lawyers and watching how they can come up with different theories than the ones you might come up with, how they can recognize important facts that need to be brought out that you might not have. And truly you understand how important teamwork is in the process, I think, of people practicing law. That's a picture of the Foster team on the day of his inauguration as governor. You see a fair number of relatively familiar faces in there. And I often like to say that until you've served in the executive branch in sort of a capacity like that, you really don't appreciate separation of powers. But I worked for a governor who had great respect for the legislature's prerogatives, great respect for the judiciary's prerogatives, and obviously understood the prerogatives of the chief executive. And seeing that firsthand was a tremendous learning experience for me.
Any other mountains you'd like to climb as a lawyer? Any other?
I did one glacier climb with my really close friend, Dean, now President Tom Galligan, who was my big running buddy when I was much younger, and he was here on the faculty. And we got up to, I think, 12,000 feet before the wind on Mount Rainier was, I think, blowing up at 100 miles an hour, so we couldn't actually go up the cone to quote summit. But when I got down off that glacier and took off my crampons and my hiking boots and my helmet and all that, I said, never again.
You've climbed a lot of mountains, though, in your career.
Well, I think that I've been lucky that I've found the paths, between the mountains, the trails.